The Buffalo Bills get smacked in their second preseason game. Is Gabe Davis on his way back to Buffalo? And episode 3 of Hard Knocks. All that this week on the Wandering Buffalo podcast.
You're now listening to the Wandering Buffalo podcast with your host, Justin Goddard.
Bills Mafia, welcome into another episode of the Wandering Buffalo podcast, a show on the Buffalo Fanbase Podcast Network. My name is Justin, and I am your host as always. And boy, was that a brutal game to watch. Obviously, the Bills getting smacked by the Chicago Bears in their second preseason game. Final score 38-0. Cheers to anybody that made it through the fall game. I'm not one to turn off a game early, and this one I actually was getting ready to. There was probably, 7 or so minutes left in the game, and I had decided after, the next Bills offensive possession, like, that's it, I'm going to bed. And they ended up going for it on fourth down, and they didn't convert it. And, usually there's a change of possession and commercial break. That's when I was going to go to bed. They kind of just rolled through it, and I ended up just gutting it out and watching the end of it. But just a brutal game for watching purposes. How much stock you want to put into it? I mean, it's preseason. I think one of the important things to remember is the context of the game, right? You have two teams in very different stages of their life cycle. Whereas you have, the Bills, five straight years of being division champs. They're, winning playoff games. They have infrastructure in place. A lot of veteran players that know how everything works there. You're not even seeing a lot of these guys play. And then the other side of the coin, you have a new coach. You have a quarterback that was a first overall pick that had an underwhelming first season. You have a team that's, trying to set the tone, establish the culture, all those things. I know there's a lot of talk of like game planning doesn't happen in the preseason. It sure looked like the Bills didn't game plan at all, and it looked like maybe the Bears had a little bit. It's not something I'm going to get too hung up on as the overall result. You go back to last year, and the Bills lost to the Bears. I think it was 33-6, and they end up in the AFC Championship game while the Bears won like 4 games, something like that. So it's preseason. I will say that there was a couple areas that I was hoping to see more positives that I didn't really see. And one of those being the safety position. Finally get to see Cole Bishop play, and he looked like he was struggling to keep his head above water. I mean, there's context to that as well. There's, he had a couple days of practice before he's in a game. He's missed pretty much all of training camp again. And, you hope some reps kind of gets him where he needs to be. I will say, after the game, Sean McDermott's talking about how they're looking for that running mate with Taylor Rapp. And I think there's a good chance we see Damar Hamlin again for at least a little bit. And I don't know. It's a position that we've been trying to upgrade for quite some time. And I think Damar Hamlin becomes an easy target for, this guy sucks. Get him out of there, blah, blah, blah. They've tried replacing him, and due to injuries, lack of development, players not being who we thought they would be, he's just kind of been the depth guy that ends up having to play. And we saw it last year with Mike Edwards. Saw it this year with Derek Forrest, a guy that I was really excited to bring in to hopefully elevate that depth and, you know, make Damar Hamlin expendable. Haven't really heard anything flashy and positive from Derek Forrest this year. Of course, Mike Edwards last year, injured, not getting up to speed, and ends up off the team before I don't even think he played a preseason snap. So I think for what Damar Hamlin is as a late round pick whose comeback is veteran depth that knows the system, it's not ideal if he's out there starting. Um, I think we just have to be careful to keep the context on Damar Hamlin of, yeah, if you see him out there with all the starters, he's going to look like one of your most easily upgradable positions, and it, because it's intended to be that way. And I guess not saying don't have frustrations and whatnot, but I mean, I guess I have to kind of transpose that more to Brandon Bean, Sean McDermott, Bobby Babich. Like, we have guys that we brought in as free agents. We have a second round pick invested in a safety. Like, whoa. Why is it looking like Damar Hamlin might be the best option is a bigger concern for me than Damar Hamlin's actual play. So we'll see what happens there. Other concerning thing for me was just kind of seeing some of the reps of the young defensive linemen in Deion Walker, TJ Sanders, Landon Jackson. It just kind of looked like on both sides of the ball, we were getting bullied in the trenches, and everything's going to work backwards from there when you have Codrington and Dane Jackson playing in your secondary against the Bears ones, and just watching this game littered with high draft picks for this Bears team, and Caleb Williams, Roma Dunze, DJ Moore, Loveland, Komet. I mean, they're loaded with talent, and this is kind of where it goes to how much stock do you want to see put into preseason games. I was kind of just looking for individual battles to be won, and there just wasn't very much to hang your hat on for this team in general. I mean, highlight players for me in this game were Brad Robbins punting and Tyrell Shavers. End of the game, Frank Gore Jr. Making the most of his opportunities. That's a valuable depth player that's probably not going to make it off the practice squad just because of the room that's in front of him. And, that's not just for this season, that's looking forward. James Cook got his extension. Ray Davis, a young draft pick on a rookie contract. Ty Johnson just re-upping for 2 years. So Frank Gore was exciting. He looks good whenever I see him play. He's also just absolutely buried in depth. And then Tyrell Shavers, I mean, made a couple plays in this game. There was the shot ball that was just out of his reach. I think that he's continuously grown over the last couple of years, and he's making a pretty aggressive push for claiming a spot on this roster of being a depth receiver, doing the special teams things you want to see out of that wide receiver group. You need the special teams to come from somewhere. And, when you're talking about a room of Coleman, Shakir, Palmer all being roster locks, and then throughout training camp, it seemed like Elijah Moore was really going to be popping, and with his guaranteed money, maybe be a roster lock. And Curtis Samuel with his guaranteed money, what we saw on the tail end of last season, maybe he was a roster lock. The Bills usually only keep 5, so it was always going to be an uphill battle. But I think we've also seen with Brandon Beane kind of a willingness to take an L, you know, move on from a player if it's not working out the way they wanted it to. Saw that with Calvin Benjamin. They sent a third round pick for him and he was gone in the same year because he just wasn't doing it. I know the financial cap implications are a little bit more tricky, especially a team that's right up against the cap. But I think we've seen from Brandon Beane a willingness to take an L in favor of putting the best 53 players out there. And it's hard for me to say Curtis Samuel is one of the best 53 when we haven't seen him play again. Dealt with injuries all of last year, dealt with injuries all of camp. Elijah Moore, if you've listened to this podcast at all, you know I was super high on him. Very excited about that signing. This first week of preseason, we see no catches. This week we have, I think it was 2 drops in there. I think there was a catch for like 4 yards. Just haven't really seen anything from him that's making me feel like we couldn't get the same or more value out of Shavers when you add in the special teams layer. Which kind of brings us into the next thing I want to talk about this week. Like I said, I don't want to spend a ton of time in that game. It was a lot of bad, nothing exciting. And I will say before we move on from the game, particularly towards the beginning of the game where you're looking at all of our depth players versus all of their starters, I don't think it's an indictment on our depth either, right? You're going into this game without a game plan, going into this game, Cole Bishop being your only projected starter, that starts the game. And I think the idea of depth is these guys can be valuable depth positions, depth players. And when you get into the season, your hope is that most of these guys aren't seeing the field very much. And especially as you get into the later stages of this game, a lot of these guys aren't even going to be on the team. So I think there's something to be said of if players go down, you have to tap into your depth. Now you're game planning. Now you know strengths and weaknesses of these guys, and you're going to see schemes and strategies and planning to kind of be able to cover up for where these guys are deficient. All different kinds of rotations, formations, what you're going to ask the guys to do, how will you back them up with maybe a safety behind them, or if it's a corner, bracket coverage to that side of the field. There's all kinds of different things that if you have to get into the depth, that will cover up gaps. And I think we've seen that time and time again from this regime that's dealt with tons of injuries. I mean, you're talking AFC Championship game comes down to the last possession last year, and you're without key players, and being able to tap into that depth and use guys to their strengths and try to cover up weaknesses, and a game that you come up just short in while you're dealing with key injuries again. So, like I said, not too much stock into this game for me, just kind of overall, I think my concern would be lack of energy, lack of matching physicality, and just looking like they wanted it more, which for me, maybe kind of a win-win. Gives McDermott some great film, gives the ability to kind of light a fire under this team about, what the standard is and what the expectations are. We'll get into that more as we talk about Hard Knocks. Uh, but went on went on a nice little tangent there. Was talking about Shavers, and then reports came out this week of Gabe Davis coming into town for a visit this week after, he completes a visit with the Steelers. And the first easy layer of this is Gabe Davis was loved in this building, kind of got over promoted to a full-time wide receiver too. Didn't work out, came up for an extension, and went and got a bigger payday than we were going to give in Jacksonville. Ends up playing, one season there, deals with an injury, ends up cut 1 year into that contract, and he's still floating around out there as a free agent. And the first thing I see here that kind of, piques my ears up is he was a loved player by this Bills organization. And, the easy answer here could be, Gabe Davis agent calls up the Bills and they're like, hey, we're trying to create a market for Gabe here. And can you kind of bring him in for a visit and create some urgency here? And, maybe just help him get a deal done somewhere. Is that the case? I have no idea. It's something that does happen in the league. And if it was with a guy like Gabe Davis, I wouldn't be surprised at all. He did everything the right way in Buffalo and has relationships in the organization. That wouldn't surprise me at all. As far as, does it make sense to bring him in? Is it something that I would want to do? All those layers. I guess it kind of depends on where you'd really see him slotting in and what his role would be in this offense. And from a number standpoint, I've seen a ton of things of like there's no spot for him. And I would really push back on that. And yes, it might be complicated. Yes, it might be a different skill set. But we're talking about a guy that did have quite a bit of success in Buffalo and has chemistry with Josh Allen and has flashed and had huge games. And like I said previously, I think the biggest issue with Gabe Davis was always that he got over promoted, and it's hard not to do that when a guy's succeeding and you kind of want to reward that. But if he's coming back into the fold here, we're talking as a wide receiver 4. We're talking about a depth guy. We're talking about a guy that maybe has to play more snaps if there's an injury. And, if you're talking about like replacing a Matt Collins role, these are the things that we always talked about Gabe Davis being great in Buffalo of, having size, being a willing blocker. He was always good with Josh Allen when plays went off script. Being able to win vertically. I mean, the issue with Gabe Davis was always that on a snap-to-snap basis, he was not a, consistent route winner. He wasn't winning on all levels of the field. And then there were some issues with the hands. But if you're talking about maybe a fourth receiver that when you go 10 personnel, and that's kind of rare for the Bills, maybe gets lost in the sauce and can, spring a deep shot. I don't really I don't really see many negatives to that. And granted, all of this is provided that, his health is checking out and, he'd be ready to play. If it's something where you kind of are bringing him in to continue working with the rehab, like, yeah, we have the facilities for it. I feel good about that. But are you making room on the depth chart to kind of rehab a guy for maybe being available down the line? I don't know about all that. The health would have to check out for me. And we get into more complicated layers to the conversation when you get the financials involved and the guaranteed money of Samuel and Elijah Moore, but I have, years of proof of concept of Gabe Davis being able to make an impact and working well with Josh Allen and having chemistry there. I have very little proof of concept of Elijah Moore and Curtis Samuel being able to make an impact for this team. And like I said, Curtis Samuel had some nice contributions down the stretch last year, but we're, we're going into another season where he's dealing with nagging injuries, and that's not just the book on Curtis Samuel for his time in Buffalo. That's kind of the book on Curtis Samuel for his career. And I believe it's Joe Marino that always has a line of, when somebody tells you who they are, believe them. And this isn't an attitude thing. This isn't a personality thing. I think it's just kind of, even if you get a healthy Curtis Samuel to start the season, which it's giving the appearance that he's tracking towards that way, like, how many games are you getting out of him? And is that kind of a gamble that you're willing to take? For my money, if all things are equal, I would be okay with a wide receiver room of Coleman, Shakir, Palmer, Gabe Davis, Tyrell Shavers, and you get your special teams out of Shavers. You get some vertical ability between both Shavers and Gabe Davis. And, for the most part, this team is in 11 or 12 personnel, and there's not, you're not looking for these guys to cover a ton of snaps. You're looking for that special teams contribution. You're looking for a role player, and you're looking for somebody that can step up if injuries happen. And we'll see what happens there. Like I said, this could all be very simple. My first point here, that you bring them in for a visit to help out a buddy that was good to your team. And it's just kind of one of the ones where, if we're talking about this in a week or two and Gabe Davis has been signed by Buffalo and we're talking about it, I'm going to find it hard for me to get upset about adding that type of player at this juncture of the season. And we'll say it's not uncommon for the Bills to go back to the well with players that they know and trust in the system. And I think that would be the type of move that they would make when we're talking about, wide receiver has kind of been a hot button subject for the last couple of years. Stephon Diggs out, Gabe Davis out. It's kind of been retooling. And, this time last year we were talking about, is the wide receiver room good enough? And the Bills go out and have the best offense that they've ever had. We're kind of in the same spot again this year, where you're swapping out Amari Cooper with Joshua Palmer, and we're talking about ancillary weapons again. And I think having a guy that's played a lot of ball with Josh Allen, and like I said, has that proof of concept, even if it's just kind of to push the depth as we, get ready to start the regular season here, and you have some question marks at the tail end of the roster. I'm not opposed to bringing in a guy like that. And like I said, this is a room where, if you asked me a month or two ago, I was talking about it being really difficult for a guy like Tyrell Shavers to even sniff this roster. And now I'm looking at it as Elijah Moore and Curtis Samuel, who are both easily roster locks for me. It I was going 5 deep at receiver that I had really not much for questions about, and now I'm at 3. And how those last 2 spots shake out, maybe the Bills keep 6 this year. I doubt it, but we're talking 2, 3 spots that are very much unsettled at this juncture for me. So if you want to add a player, you can do it for a low cost, and it's a guy that has had success with the team. Go for it. Kind of moving into this episode of Hard Knocks. Easily my favorite episode so far. Nothing really against the first 2 episodes. They were fun. Like I said last week, it kind of felt like I was watching Bills produced content or lighthearted fluff pieces and not really the same experience that we've seen in other seasons of Hard Knocks. And I'm not really out here looking for like the juicy drama storylines of, issues with players and drama and all that. But I think that through the first 2 episodes, we weren't really getting that like behind the scenes look of like how the culture is built up, how much it means to these guys, how they're competing day in and day out, how the tone is set, and seeing roster battles shake out. And I still don't think we got like a ton of that, but you see some of the urgency and the attention to detail, and you get to see Joe Brady and Bobby Babich, kind of in their coaches meetings. One of my favorite things that I saw was, Babich breaking down film and, talking about playing out the full clip and not just like stopping after the play stops. Looking at, is everybody running to their guys on the ground to help them up? Are they celebrating together? You know, talking about the energy. And then you see the energy from Bobby Babich and Joe Brady and seeing McDermott, running a team meeting and, you know, in front of the whole team celebrating Jimmy Charlo and the special teams play that he made. And this is a guy that's been on the team for like 3 days. 3 years would be a lot different. A guy that's been with the team for 3 days, making an impact in a game, and then in a team meeting, being called out in front of the whole team of, this is the type of play that we want to see. This is the type of play that you're not positive you're going to make the roster. Go make a play like that. It's going to get you more reps. And I really enjoyed we hear so much about the culture. We hear so much about, guys are going to have to earn it to play. And just kind of seeing how that is talked about and actually pushed inside the building. Really cool to see. Also seeing the James Cook contract kind of play out in the episode and him get the extension and kind of feel like the tension lifting up, Brandon Beane and James Cook meeting together and like you could feel the tension there kind of peeling away. And then, for a guy like James Cook, who really quiet guy, really keeps to himself, even through this Holden, like still showing up, being in meetings, being a teammate, just at a certain point, he, stopped practicing to kind of push the issue. But, from like an organizational standpoint, when you have a contract dispute and a guy is holding in, you can't really ask for like a better attitude towards it than you got from James Cook. These things have tendency, you look at the Micah Parsons situation, and, you know, he's public. He's on podcasts. He's talking about how Jerry Jones is doing business. Jerry Jones is, talking smack about if he's going to be available and cutting checks and all these layers that make it public. And depending on who you talk to, Jerry Jones does it on purpose to get eyeballs on the Cowboys, and that's his businessman approach, whatever. But I think for the perspective of like trying to run a buttoned up, perennially successful organization, like this is the type of thing you want to see, even when things are not going exactly smoothly, it's still not like a media circus around it. It's something that we've all talked about constantly because slow off season, not much else is going on, and it's a big deal. But there's no like you're not feeling bad blood throughout the situation, and to see it all come together, to see James Cook, how emotional he is signing that contract of hitting a lifelong goal, to see the teammates celebrating it with him. I think really, really cool to see that kind of happen in real time. Uh, so yeah, super fun episode. We got another preseason game coming up against Tampa Bay. Hopefully it's a little bit more fun, but I don't really expect much of anything different. Maybe you see a little bit from the starters as you kind of ramp up towards the regular season. But I kind of expect more of the same we have a lot of youth and depth guys taking on roles, and I think you're going to see a lot of run from them again. Keep that context of preseason, know what this team has been, where we've been, where we're hopefully going, and, take it for what it is. Preseason game that it might have some good, it might have some bad, it might have a lot of bad. We'll see, but it's all just kind of giving us looks at depth players in uncomfortable positions. I know it's hard. I'm sitting on the couch watching the Bills get boat raced, and no matter what the context is, it's never fun to watch your favorite team get absolutely smacked. Keep the context. We've almost made it to the regular season, and, you got another team where it should be sky's the limit, and we should be talking about this team making a deep playoff run come January. But yeah, that's it for this week's episode. As always, appreciate it if you like, share, subscribe, tell a friend about the show. Like I said, we got one more preseason game to get through, and then we're here. So make sure you're tuned in. Appreciate you tuning in as always. We'll talk to you. It's going to be 2 weeks. Producer Jake is having a bunch of family come down from to visit him. We might still eke out an episode, but very likely it's going to be 2 weeks. So we're going to be gearing up for the regular season. Just make sure you subscribe. We got an episode come out next week. Maybe it's 2 weeks. You hit that subscribe button, you'll know when we come out. But we'll see you next time, whenever that may be. Until then, and as always, go Bills.